Do you think it needs to have a body to start to notice the signs of life and to develop the kind of system that's able to perceive the world in the way that an AGI should, and act in the world? So should we be thinking about robots, or can this be achieved in a purely digital
So
system?
I have a clear opinion on that, and that's that no, it does not need to be embodied in the physical world, where you could say most of my career is about making simulated virtual worlds,
Sure.
in games or virtual reality. And so on a fundamental level, I believe that you can make a simulated environment that provides much of the value of what the real environment does. And restricting yourself to operating at real time in the physical world with physical objects, I think, is an enormous handicap. I mean, that's one of the real lessons driven home by all my aerospace work, is that, reality is a bitch in so many ways there. We're dealing with all the mechanical components, like everything fails. Murphy's Law, even if you've done it right before, on your fifth one, it might come out differently. So yeah, I think that anybody that is all in on the embodied aspect of it, they are tying a huge weight to their ankles. And I think that I would almost count them out. Anybody that's making that a cornerstone of their belief about it, I would almost write them off as being worried about them getting to AGI first. I was very surprised that Elon's big on the humanoid robots. I mean, like the NASA Robonaut stuff was always like almost a gag line. Like, what are you doing, people?
Well, that's very interesting because he has a very pragmatic view of that. That's just a way to solve a particular problem in a factory.
Now, I do think that once you have an AGI, robotic bodies, humanoid bodies are going to be enormously valuable. I just don't think they're helpful getting to AGI.
Well, he has a very sort of practical view, which I disagree with and I argue with him. But is a practical view that there's, you could transfer the problem of driving to the problem of robotic manipulation, because so much of it is perception. It's perception and action, and it's just a different context. And so you can apply all the same kind of data engine learning processes to a different environment. And so why not apply it to the humanoid robot environment? But I think, I do think that there's a certain magic to the embodied robot.
That may be the thing that finally convinces people.
Yes.
But again, I don't really care that much about convincing people. The world that I'm looking towards is, you go to the website and say, I want 5 Frank 1As to work on my team today. And they all spin up and they start showing up in your Zoom meetings.
To push back, but also to agree with you. But first, to push back, I do think you need to convince people for them to welcome that thing into their life.
I think there's enough businesses that operate on an objective kind of profit loss sort of basis that, I mean, if you look at how many things, again, talking about the world as an evolutionary space there, when you do have free markets and you have entrepreneurs, you're going to have people that are going to be willing to go out and try whatever crazy things. And when it proves to be beneficial, there's fast followers in all sorts of places.
Yeah. And you're saying that, I mean, Quake and VR is a kind of embodiment, but just in a digital world. And if you're able to demonstrate, if you're able to do something productive in that kind of digital reality, then AGI doesn't need to have a body.
Yeah. So like one of the really practical technical questions that I kind of keep arguing with myself over, if you're doing a training and learning and you've got, like, you can watch Sesame Street and you can play Master System games or something, is it enough to have just a video feed that is that video coming in? Or should it literally be on a virtual TV set in a virtual room, even if it's, a simple room, just to have that sense of you're looking at a 2D projection on a screen versus having the screen beamed directly into your retinas? And I think it's possible to maybe get past some of these signs of life of things with the just kind of projected directly into the receptor fields. But eventually, for more kind of human emotional connection for things, probably having some VR room with a lot of screens in it for the AI to be learning in is likely helpful.
It may be a world of different AIs interacting with each other.
That self-play, I do think, is one of the critical things, where socialization-wise, one of the other limitations I set for myself thinking about these is I need something that is at least potentially real time, because it's nice you can always slow down time. You can run on a subscale system and test an algorithm at some lower level. And if you've got extra horsepower, running it faster than real time is a great thing. But I want to be able to have the AIs either socially interact with each other or critically with actual people. Your sort of child development psychiatrist that comes in and interacts and does the good boy, bad boy sort of thing as they're going through and exploring different things. And it's nice I come back to the value of constraints in a lot of ways. And if I say, well, one of my constraints is real-time operation, I mean, it might still be a huge data center full of computers, but it should be able to interact on a Zoom meeting with people. And that's how you also do start convincing people, even if it's not a robot body moving around, which eventually gets to irrefutable levels. Mm-hmm. But if you can go ahead and not just type back and forth to a GPT bot on something, but you're literally talking to them in an embodied over Zoom form and working through problems with them or exploring situations, having conversations that are fully stateful and learned, I think that that's a valuable thing. So I do keep all of my eyes on things that can be implemented within sort of that 30 frames per second kind of work. And I think that's feasible.
Do you think the most compelling experiences that at first will be for pleasure or for business, as they ask in airports? So meaning is it, if it's interacting with AI agents, will it be sort of like friends, entertainment, almost like a therapist or whatever, that kind of interaction? Or is it in the business setting, something like you said, brainstorming different ideas? Sort of, this is all a different formulation of kind of a Turing test, or the spirit of the original Turing test. Where do you think the biggest benefit will first come?
So it's going to start off hugely expensive. I mean, if we're still all guessing about what compute is going to be necessary, I fall on the side of, I don't think you run the numbers and you're like 86 billion neurons, 100 trillion synapses. I don't think those all need to be weights. I don't think we need models that are quite that big, evaluated quite that often. I base that on, we've got reasonable estimates of what some parts of the brain do. We don't have the neocortex formula, but we kind of get some of the other sensory processing. And it doesn't feel like we can simulate that in computers for less weights. But still, it's probably going to be thousands of GPUs to be running, a human level AGI. Depending on how it's implemented, that might give you sort of a clan of 128 kind of run-in batch people, depending on whether there's sparsity in the way the weights and things are set up. Mm-hmm. If it is a reasonably dense thing, then just the memory bandwidth trade-offs means you get 128 of them at the same time. And either it's all feeding together, learning in parallel, or kind of all running together, kind of talking to a bunch of people. But still, if you've got thousands of GPUs necessary to run these things, it's going to be kind of expensive, where it might start off $1,000 an hour for your, even post-development or something for that, which would be something that you would only use for a business, something where you think they're going to help you make a strategic decision or point out something super important. But I also am completely confident that we will have another factor of 1,000 in cost performance increase in AGI type calculations. Not in general computing necessarily, but there's so much more that we can do with packaging, making those right trade-offs, all those same types of things that in the next couple decades, 1,000x easy. And then you're down to $1 an hour. And then you're kind of like, well, I should have an entourage of AIs that are, following me around, helping me out on anything that I want them to do.
That's one interesting trajectory, but I'll push back because I have for in that case, if you want to pay thousands of dollars, it should actually provide some value. I think it's easier for cheaper to provide value via a dumb AI that will take us towards AGI, to just have a friend. I think there's an ocean of loneliness in the world. And I think an effective friend that doesn't have to be perfect, that doesn't have to be intelligent, that has to be empathic, having emotional intelligence, having ability to remember things, having ability to listen. Most of us don't listen to each other. One of the things that love, and when you care about somebody, when you love somebody, is when you listen. And that is something we treasure about each other. And if an AI can do that kind of thing, I think that provides a huge amount of value, and very importantly, provides value in its ability to listen and understand versus provide really good advice. I think providing really good advice is very difficult. Is another next level step that would. I think it's just easier to do companionship.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree. I mean, I think that there's very few things that I would argue can't be reduced to some kind of a narrow AI.
Yeah.
I think we can do $1 trillion of value easily and all the things that can be done there. And a lot of it can be done with smoke and mirrors without having to go the whole thing. I mean, there's going to be the equivalent of the Doom the Doom version for the AGI that's not really AGI, it's all smoke and mirrors, but it happens to do enough valuable things that it's enormously useful and valuable to people. But at some point, you do want to get to the point where you have the fully general thing and you stop making bespoke specialized systems for each thing, and you wind up start using the higher level language instead of writing everything in assembly language.
What about consciousness? The C word, what do you think that's fundamental to solving AGI, or is it a quirk of human cognition?
So I think most of the arguments about consciousness don't have a whole lot of merit. I think that consciousness is kind of the way the brain feels when it's operating.
Yes.
And this idea that, I do generally subscribe to sort of the pandemonium theories of consciousness where there's all these things bubbling around. And I think of them as kind of slightly randomized, sparse distributed memory bit strings of things that are kind of happening, recalling different associative memories. And eventually you get some level of consensus and it bubbles up to the point of being a conscious thought there. And the little bits of stochasticity that are sitting on in this as it cycles between different things and recalls different memory, that's largely our imagination and creativity. So I don't think there's anything deeply magical about it, certainly not symbolic. I think it is generally the flow of these associations drawn up with stochastic noise overlaid on top of them. And I think so much of that is like, it depends on what you happen to have in your field of view as some other thought was occurring to you that overlay and blend into the next key that queries your memory for things. And that kind of determines how your chain of consciousness goes.
So that's kind of the qualia, the subjective experience of it is not essential for intelligence.
I don't think so. I don't think there's anything really important there.
What about some other human qualities like fear of mortality and stuff like that? Like the fact that this ride ends, is that important? Like we talked so much throughout this conversation about the value of deadlines and constraints. Do you think that's important for intelligence?
That's actually a super interesting angle that I don't usually take on that, about has death being a deadline that forces you to make better decisions.
Yes.
Because I have heard people talk about how if you have immortality, people are going to stop trying and working on things because they've got all the time in the world.
Yeah.
But I would say that I don't expect it to be a super critical thing, that a sense of mortality and death, impending death, is necessary there, because those are things that they do wind up providing reward signals to us, and we will be in control of the reward signals. And there will have to be something fundamental that engenders curiosity and goal setting and all of that. Something is going to play in there at the reward level. Whether it's positive or negative or both. I don't have any strong opinions on exactly what it's going to be, but that's that type of thing where I doubt that might be one of those half dozen key things that has to be sorted out on exactly what the master reward, that's the meta reward over all of the local task specific rewards have to be.
That could be that big negative reward of death. Maybe not death, but ability to walk away from an interaction. So it bothers me when people treat AI systems like servants. So it doesn't bother me, but I mean, it really is drawing the line between what an AI system could be. It's limiting the possibility of what an AI system could be. It's treating them as just as tools. Now, that's of course from a narrow AI perspective. There's so many problems that narrow AI could solve, just like you said, as in its form of a tool, but it could also be a being, which is much more than a tool. And to become a being, you have to respect that thing for being a being, and for that, it has to be able to have to make its own decisions, to walk away, to say, "I had enough of you. I would like to break up with you now. You've not treated me well, and I would like to move on." So I think that actually that choice to end things
So I a
is
couple of things on
powerful.
that. So on the one hand, it is kind of disturbing when you see people being like people that are mean to robots and mean to Alexa and whatever, and that seems to speak badly about humanity. But there's also the exact opposite side of that, where you have so many people that imbue humanity in inanimate objects or things that are toys or that are relatively limited. So I think there may even be more danger about people putting more emotional investment into a lot of these proto AIs in different ways.
Yeah.
Um,
And then the AI would manipulate that. But,
but as far as like the AI
let me,
ethics sides of things,
yes.
I really stay away from any of those discussions or even really thinking about it. It's similar with the safety things where I think it's just premature.
Yeah.
And there's a certain class of people that enjoy thinking about impractical things that are not in the world and of pragmatic effect around you. And I think that again, because I don't think there's going to be a fast takeoff. I think we actually will have time to have these debates when we know the shape of what we're debating. And some people do take a principled approach that they think it's going to go too fast, that you really do need to get ahead of it, that you need to be thinking about this because we have slow processes of coming to any kind of consensuses or even coming up with ideas about this. And maybe that's true. I wouldn't put any of my money or funding into something like that because I don't think it's a problem yet. And I think that we will have these signs of life when we've got our learning disabled toddler. We should really start talking about some of the safety and ethics issues, but probably not before then.
Can you elaborate briefly about why you don't think there'll be a fast takeoff? Is there some deep intuition you have about it? Is it
So
because it's grounded in the physical world, or why?
yeah, so it is my belief that we're going to start off with something that requires thousands of GPUs. And I don't know if you've tried to go get 1,000 GPU instance on a cloud anytime recently, but these are not things that you can just go spin up hundreds of. There are real challenges these things are going to take data centers, and data centers take years to build, and the last few years, we've seen a few of them kind of coming up, going in different places. They're big engineering efforts. You can hear people bemoan about the fact that the network was wired all wrong and it took them a month to go unwire it and rewire it the right way. These aren't things that you can just magic into existence. And the ideas of like the old tropes about it's going to escape onto the internet and take over other systems. There's the fast takeoff ones are clearly nonsense because you just can't open TCP connections above a certain rate, no matter how smart you are, even if you have perfect hacking ability. That take over the world in an instant sort of thing just isn't plausible at all. And even if you had access to all of the resources, these are going to be specialized systems where you're going to wind up with something that is architected around exactly this chip with this interconnect, and it's not just going to be able to be plopped somewhere else. Now, interestingly, it is going to be something that the entire code for all of it will easily fit on a thumb drive. That's total spy movie thriller sorts of things where you could have, hey, we cracked the secret to AGI and it fits on this thumb drive and anyone could steal it. Now they're still gonna have to build the right data center to deploy it and have the right kind of life experience curriculum to take it up to the point where it's valuable. But the real core of it, the magic that's gonna happen there is going to be very small. It's again, tens of thousands of lines of code, not millions of lines of code.
It is possible to imagine a world, as you mentioned, in the spy thriller view, if it's just a few lines of code. We can imagine a world where the surface of computation is growing, maybe growing exponentially, meaning there's, the refrigerators start getting a GPU. And first of all, the smartphones, the billions of smartphones. But maybe if there become highways through which code can spread across the entirety of the computation surface, then you don't any longer have to book AWS
But there are
GPUs.
real fundamental issues there. When you start getting down to taking an actual problem and putting it on an abstract machine like that,
Mhm.
that has not worked out well in practice. And the idea that there was always, like, it's always been easy to come up with ways to get compute faster, to say more flops or more giga ops or whatever there. That's usually the easy part. But you then have interconnect and then memory for what goes into it. And when you talk about saying, well, cell phones, well, you're limited to like a 5G connection or something on that. And if you say if you take your calculation and you factor it across a million cell phones instead of 1,000 GPUs in a warehouse, you might be able to have some kind of a substrate like that, but it could be operating then at 1/1000th the speed. And so, yes, you could have an AGI working there, but it wouldn't be a real-time AGI. It would be something that is operating at really a snail's pace, much, much slower than kind of human level thought for things. So
Yeah,
I'm not worried about that problem.
you're transferring the problem into the interconnect, the communication, the
Yeah.
shared memory, the collective intelligence aspect of it, which is extremely difficult as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's back to the very earliest days of supercomputers. You still have the balance between bandwidth, storage, and computation. And sometimes they're easier to get one or the other, but it's been remarkably constant across all those years that you still need all three.